Hello and welcome back to my workshop for another of Harry's Jeti videos. This video is to revise and replace a video I put out about a month ago about mixing rudder to twin throttles. It was done originally at the request of someone who wanted to be able to mix the rudder to the throttle to do some wild aerobatics, so that pushing the rudder right, for instance, would increase throttle on the left-hand engine, and pushing rudder left would increase throttle on the right-hand engine. And that's very good for steering seaplanes on the water as well. And that video had been up for about a month, and I got a message from Danny Fenton saying, done this, but I can't get the throttle lock to work on the second engine. And I took a look at it and thought, oops. And in checking it over, I spotted another problem with it, in that the trim for the throttle, which was included in the mixer from the main throttle to the second throttle, the trim was working at the top end, because unfortunately when you add trim into the mix from the throttle, it doesn't carry it intelligently, as in being a throttle low trim. It carries it just as if the trim buttons were an added in mix. So they were working in what Jeti calls a linear trim mode, not even centered trim. So whenever you moved the trim button, it moved the control no matter where the control is. So even at full throttle, trim was adding on. And that would really mess up your endpoints if you were using the likes of a carburetor on a model where you've got endpoints set. So we need to address these problems. Sorry about that, folks. I was just concentrating too much on just getting the rudder to throttle working, and I didn't check fully that the throttles themselves hadn't been compromised. Unfortunately, the original version can't be fixed by simple tweaks because of the way the Jeti software works, the way it doesn't carry through the throttle trim intelligently, and the fact that the throttle lock seems to work at the servo layer, not at the function layer. So mixing throttle 1 to throttle 2, the throttle lock works on throttle 1, but it works at the throttle 1 servo. So the function is what's used in the mixing. So you mix function level to function level, but since the throttle lock is working at the servo level, the information doesn't get through the mix. So we have to do a complete rewrite. And this is what we'll do. And I'll prove at the end that it does all work properly, although there is one very small limitation. Off we go. And here we'll leave it as a one engine model. Now this is where we need to create some new functions. So we'll create throttle left, throttle left, okay. Leave the control out for a moment, and we'll create throttle right. Okay, carry on, and it's assigned the channels for us because the main throttle function and its servo output are going to become virtual functions and channels. We're not actually going to plug a servo in. So we're going to move that one out of the way to some unused channel. You've got 24 of them should you need it, so just move it up somewhere that beyond the number of channels you need. So we'll call that throttle 1, which means that that can be freed up for some other servo that you want. So here's our two throttles that we're going to use as actual servos plugged in. See, we will not plug a servo into this one, but we need the channel there because we're now going to use that channel as the stick, as it were, for these throttle functions. Now that we know where that is, it's channel 11, we can go back and assign the control for these, which will be channel 11, not the throttle function. So we go in here, choose that, come down, channel. There it is. Okay to that. Come down here. Wherever we put the throttle, there we go. Okay. Now the reason we're using the channel as the control is that things like the trims and the throttle lock function work properly on the throttle function and channel that Jeti created, and therefore by using that channel as the input to the throttle left and throttle right functions, it'll carry them through, except that it doesn't quite do it properly, unfortunately. Why is that? What happens is that if we look at this, you see how it's allowing minus 100% to plus 100%. Unfortunately, if we trim down, it won't go beyond minus 100%, but we'll see what can be done about that. So we carry on, create and activate, and no, we don't need to do that. Okay, let's first of all take a look at what's going on in the servos. So there's the original Jeti's throttle function and Jeti's throttle servo, which I say we will not plug a servo into. That's just on a channel above the ones we need to use. So here's our throttle left and throttle right, and as you can see as I move the stick, these two are simply following what that does. Say okay to that. Let's create a throttle lock. Okay. Check again the servos. Throttle cut is off. Everything works. Throttle cut is on. And there we are. Because Jeti has locked that one, and these two are following that output, they're locked. So now at least we have a throttle cut that works. Okay, switch that back on. What about the trim? Let's trim up. There's the original virtual channel. Here's the others. Now, if I open the throttle, hopefully these will stop at 100%. And they do, because the throttle is behaving properly. Lovely. So now we're not overdriving the servos at the top end. The one little quirk is that it won't go negative. So the original throttle will go negative on the trims, but these won't. Now that shouldn't really be a problem, whether you're using electric or a piston engine with a carburetor, because, let me bring it back to the 0 point, if we have a look at the actual time values, 1 millisecond is actually quite a lot of travel on a servo. It's a low signal. It's substantially lower than your GR or Futaba would do at 100% or minus 100%. So really trying to trim back beyond that is really getting into quite extreme travel levels. And it's not unreasonable to set up a model with a carburetor that just trim at neutral with servo there is actually shutting the engine down, and therefore you trim up quite a bit to get your idle. So there is that little catch there, but it shouldn't really be a problem to you. Okay, so at least we now have a properly working throttle. The throttle lock works on our two throttles, and opening up the trim doesn't mess up the top end. Okie doke. Right, let's have a look at the mixing. Premixing, add from rudder to throttle left. Come down here. Let's give it a value of 30%. The switch, I'm going to use this switch here. Okay to that. And that's pretty much that done. Except we need the curve. Yes. Come along here to the curve. Now we could go to a 3 point and change it to a flat line, but there is a quicker way of getting in there. There's exactly the curve we want. Throttle left, we want the right-hand engine to throttle up, do we? Throttle left, we pull throttle left, throttle to the right, the left-hand engine throttles up. So as I move the rudder stick left, nothing happens to the left throttle mix. As I move the throttle to the right, it's going to follow the upward curve and give you more left throttle. Say OK to that. Let's prove it. So I'll give it a little bit of stick. I'll move the throttle to the right. The left-hand engine should throttle up, the right-hand engine should not. If I switch the mixer on, it would help, wouldn't it? There we go. So you can see the right-hand engine's not moving, but left-hand engine's throttling up. If I move the rudder left, our left one shouldn't move. That's good. OK to that. OK. And now we just do pretty much the same thing for throttle right. We said 30%. Switch is that one. OK, and along here to the curve. Now they don't happen to neatly make the exact opposite curve to what we've just done for the other one. So you can either go into a 3-point and modify it, or come back down to this one, and then all we need to do is modify that point there. Pop it up there. OK to that. And now we'll have a look in here. Switch the mixer on. If I push, I'll pull it all the way back, make it easier. If I push the rudder to the right, the left-hand engine alone should throttle up. It does. And if I push the rudder to the left, the right-hand engine alone should throttle up. It does. Okie doke. That's looking nice so far. Let's double check things. Give it a bit of throttle. Throttle cut works. Lovely. And throttle trim is still not messing about at the top end. Let's put that back to 0. Now there is one remaining problem to deal with, and it's this. You've activated the throttle cut. Throttle doesn't work. Lovely. But you've left the rudder to throttle mixer on. Watch what happens. Oh, if you've got a piston engine, that's not a problem. You've shut down, for instance. But if you've got an electric motors, moving the rudder is suddenly going to make the motor come to life, even though the throttle cut is on. How do we overcome that? Straightforward, a logic switch, so that the mixer can only be working when the throttle cut is off, motor's in the run position. How do we go about that? Come out of here, into advanced properties, a logic switch. Okay, control 1 will be the mixer switch. So move it to the on position, say OK. And control 2 will be the throttle cut switch in the motor run position. So throttle cut off, OK to that. And the condition will be and. So the output will only go on if throttle cut is off, in other words, motor run position, and the mixer is on. Should the mixer be off, the output's obviously off because you don't want any mixing. But should the throttle cut be in the on position, i.e. no motor run, and the mixer is on, still locked off. Okay, so then we can come back to our mixers, edit them, and all we need to do is change the switch, clear it out, and put in that logic switch. Okay to that one. Oops, not the accelerometer. There we go. Now let's have a look at what's going on in the servos. Okay, throttle cut is applied. The mixer is still, in our eyes, switched on, except of course the logic switch has switched it off, but the main mixer switch is in the on position. So throttle, no effect. Mixer now, no effect. See the rudder's moving, but we're not suddenly getting the motors come to life. If I switch the motor to the on position, i.e. throttle cut off, now the mixer is having its effect. Okay, and there we go. Except that there's still another problem. We come up to full throttle, and because you might be wanting to do some really wild aerobatics at full throttle. You push the rudder, the mixer's still on. Look what happens. The spinning up engine goes to too high a value. Maybe not such a problem with electric motor, but once again, if you have a piston engine with a carburetor and the throttle has reached its maximum travel, you're going to be binding up the servos. So what do you do about that? Well, we come out to the servo setup, and it will be the maximum positive limit. So we come along to our throttle servos, and this is where limits work. The normal travel of the servo is going to be the max pos and max negative. That's how its basic response is. But if you add in extra things like mixing, where your value of the rudder mix is going on top of the servo travel, it can go above 100%, and that's where a limit can stop things going any further. So we're talking about the positive travel, so we bring that down to 100%, move along to our other throttle, bring that down to 100%. Let's take a look. Now mixing's on, so come down here, as you can see, mixing changes, but we go up to 100% and it doesn't move any further. Come back a little bit, plus 30 and 83 should take you to what, 113, but it will stop at 100. Provides a hard limit there. See, I'm still moving the rudder, but it's hit the hard limit. So it will not overdrive your throttle servos and start them binding. What if you have changed the max positive travel because you need it to be, say, 95% on that throttle? You've hit the end limit. Yeah, then just change your max positive limit also to 95 and it won't overdrive it. Let's take a look. So our right hand throttle, the servo only goes up to 95%, and again the mixing cannot overdrive it. If we move that way, it reaches its 95 and it can't overdrive. So there you go, that's everything sorted.